Hello, and welcome to ITIF's webinar, Battery Manufacturing Powers Up. My name is David Hart. I'm a senior fellow at ITIF and professor at George Mason's Schar School of Policy and Government. Today's event celebrates the opening of ITIF's Clean Energy Innovation European branch. It's currently located in the Brussels apartment of Rob Boyle, whom you'll hear from in a moment. Rob's remit is to provide nonpartisan analysis to European and UK climate and energy policymakers, and to join with us here in DC on projects of transatlantic significance. There are few issues as important as the one that we're going to take up today, the future of the auto industry. And so it's a perfect topic for this inaugural event. We have speakers joining us from Oxford in the UK, from Stockholm in Sweden, as well as the San Francisco Bay Area, as well as Brussels. I'll introduce each of the speakers just before they come on. I'm going to show you their pictures. And each one will have about 10 minutes, and we'll have some time for questions and answers at the end. Please enter your questions through the Slido box on the website or wherever you're watching the video, and you can use the hashtag ITIF Energy. So with no further ado, let me introduce Rob Boyle, who's coming to us live from Brussels. Rob is a senior policy analyst with the Clean Energy team at ITIF. He came to ITIF after a stint in the European Commission at DG Klima, and before that, a long spell at the European Parliament. Rob is going to take a few minutes and introduce the topic, and then we will bring our other speakers in. Rob, it's all yours.
Thanks, David. Won't come as a surprise, but batteries are a crucial tool in the fight against climate change. They're central to decarbonising transport as we make the switch to electric vehicles, and they're also key to integrating intermittent renewables into the energy mix, offering the potential for a highly flexible mass electrical storage system. And so batteries will be vital as we develop smart grids, roll out smart meters, and couple them with IoT devices. This in turn will allow consumers to play a much bigger part in demand-side response and providing capacity services to the grid. So it's no surprise that policymakers are taking an interest in batteries. It's clear that batteries are going to play an increasingly important role in our economy in the coming decades. But there are also challenges for the battery sector. We need to reduce costs and increase energy density. We need to expand storage capacity and product lifespan. We need to secure access to raw materials. Perhaps most importantly, we need to develop sustainable supply chains and end-of-life management to minimize wider environmental damage as a result of battery production and disposal. Overcoming these challenges is key to cutting global greenhouse gas emissions from the transport sector. To give an example, batteries constitute a significant proportion of the higher costs associated with electric vehicles at present. So better batteries will be both a prerequisite and a catalyst for the switch to electric vehicles. This challenge is well illustrated in the European Automobile Manufacturers Association, SEA, 2020 report on making the transition to zero-emission mobility. That report points out that 80% of Europe's electric vehicle sales are confined to just 6 member states, with some of the highest GDPs in Europe. And it spells out the fairly obvious connection between market share and relative costs of electric vehicles in different countries. We also shouldn't forget that there's an important geopolitical aspect to all this. China currently dominates global battery manufacturing, and this presents a strategic risk. Dependence on a single third country supplier creates a vulnerability to supply disruption, which can have many causes but the same harmful result. Europeans, for example, experience this with regard to dependence on natural gas from Russia. Similar challenges may arise for the UK in the Brexit context. And there's also a commercial challenge. European manufacturers currently account for more than half of global vehicle and parts exports. So European companies will have a lot to lose if they're unable to keep up with changes in manufacturing processes and supply chains, which will come about through the switch to electric vehicles. And finally, the market dominance of China also hampers competitiveness and potential for growth of the electric vehicle sectors in the US, UK, and the EU. So everyone's been trying to address this. In the EU, it's announced its intention to significantly strengthen its battery sector. These ideas have been sketched out in various communications. It's a recurring theme, for example, in the EU's 2050 long-term strategy, which is one of the foundations of the European Green Deal. In fact, new legislative proposals on batteries were actually scheduled for publication today, I think, but they look to be delayed until mid-December. But that said, a lot has already been done. For example, the establishment of the European Battery Alliance, which I'm glad we're going to hear a lot more about in this session, is one of the key elements in all this. At the same time, the UK government, perhaps inspired by the EU's efforts, has recently announced its intention to significantly increase the share of offshore wind power in the UK energy mix. It has signalled that it wants to couple this with a major rollout of battery electric vehicles, which will make use of this relatively cheap, clean energy. Just this week, it's been emerging that the UK government will bring forward an outright ban on the sale of new petrol and diesel cars to 2030. Moving over to the US, I think Tesla has undoubtedly played a major role in increasing consumer awareness of and interest in electric vehicles. That leadership seen the state of California, for example, commit to a phase out of combustion vehicle sales by 2035. There are also very high expectations for the incoming Biden administration. David, our host, has actually published a blog in ITIF's Innovation Files last week, which discusses this. It outlines several of the issues that we hope to see addressed in the new US government policies, namely a comprehensive strategy for batteries in the US that, if it's adopted, we hope would support electric vehicle adoption and manufacturing. So turning to today, this session draws on expertise from the US, UK, and the EU. It will hopefully shed some light on the challenges and opportunities for the battery sector in these respective regions and the possibilities for strengthened international cooperation in this crucial area. And with that introduction, I will now hand back to David and today's experts. Thanks.
Thanks, Rob. That was a really helpful introduction. And now we're going to have a chance to drill down in each of these geographies, starting with the EU. And our presenter is Ilka van Dalvig. She's joining us from Stockholm, where she's a policy manager for smart grid and storage at EIT Energy. She's spent more than a decade working on battery value chain issues. And now she has important responsibilities to work with the European Battery Alliance. And Ilka, the floor is yours. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much, David. I'm very pleased to be on this panel today, and I try to give you a short background or history lesson on the development of this European Battery Alliance, where EIT Energy is tasked to drive the industrial work stream of it since 2017. We already got a brilliant introduction on the EU policy landscape, but I would like to take you back to 2017. Can you go one slide ahead, please? How the situation was in Europe in not so long ago. It's 3 years only. When if you're looking at the supply chain for batteries, it was really non-existent in Europe. But already then, I think electrification was seen as a cornerstone for decarbonizing, especially the transport system. And the small graph you see down here by UBS estimates was really the only one that we found that predicted this enormous, almost double exponential growth in the demand of batteries and e-mobility by that time. We at Energy adopted this picture and introduced to the Commission the concept of the hockey stick. I think most of the Southern European countries are not familiar. Maybe you know better what a hockey stick looks like in the US. When we started to talk about how could Europe become a winner in the battery race. There were a lot of perceptions that either Europe is too late, we already lost the battery race, we are too early, we should wait for the next generation, as well as there was generally no awareness that really batteries and battery cells could be a bottleneck for the future electrification. Next slide, please. Could you move one slide, please? Yes, but this was addressed by Vice President Maros Šefčovič, who by that time was the leading the Energy Union, who noted that Europe had to act fast and had to act coordinated in order to take up this race and really establish a sustainable battery industry in Europe. coming back to that later a little bit, it has shown that policymakers cannot predict the future, but they can greatly influence it. And you can jump ahead one more. This birth of this European Battery Alliance really proved to be the greatest industrialization project in the EU in the last years, and the progress it's made is really Maros himself phrased the term at the speed of lightning. In only 6 months, we developed an action plan based on input from the industry, and also with the active participation of the industrial networks that we have been building in this time, that led to the launch of the EU battery strategy in March 2018, only 6 months after the launch of the Battery Alliance. You can go ahead one more. Thank you. And I think this one is really one of the cornerstones in the European Battery Alliance, one of the guiding documents that has been published by the Commission that states that it wants to make Europe a global leader in sustainable battery production and use in the context of the circular economy. I think questions related to sustainability, including a carbon footprint for batteries, ethical supply, as well as recycling, have been highlighted from the very start, not only from the Commission, but also from the industrial stakeholders. The lowest one, making Europe the global leader, it has been taken up in this new battery regulation that is expected to be published next month now. Then there will be a couple of measures relating to the topics I just mentioned. You can go ahead one more. And just to give you a flavor how this European Battery Alliance, it's not only about the industry, but it also encompasses a lot of other initiatives that are promoted by the European Commission, all the way from long-term research to short-term pre-commercial initiatives, as well as financial support for various active. It's just a flavor of the European battery ecosystem that has been growing since then. Next slide. And we at Energy, as I mentioned, have been driving this industrial development program that since the start, when we started out with a small workshop of about 10 companies along the entire value chain, now has grown into a network of more than 550 members, spanning all the way from raw materials to cell manufacturing, all the way to recycling, including research, including commission services, as well as financial institutions. Next slide, please. And as one of the instruments developed by the European Battery Alliance, we have the business investment platform that we see as an instrument to accelerate access to finance for the growing battery industry in Europe. It not only shortens time to investments for the projects that are in our portfolio, but it also de-risks business risk for the investee as well as investment risk for the investor. Next slide, please. Here, it's just a short overview on projects that since the launch of the BIP last year have been introduced in our portfolio, really covering all the way from new mining projects that is quite new to Europe, all the way to large-scale ambitions for new cell manufacturers, as well as recycling projects. Next one. So, since 2017, when we started out on a very bleak note, what really has happened since then? If you're looking at the growth rate for EVs in Europe, you can see that there is an enormous growth rate, and the newest numbers for October show that we're actually superseding this again. We are now at a growth rate at 12%. That has not been slowed down by the recent COVID pandemic, as you can see in the right-hand picture. It even increased the sale of EVs in comparison to conventional vehicles. So I think we are all on a good page. The investments have been growing as well. We are now even more attractive for investment than China. So I think in catching up with them, We have done quite well, and just 2 pictures just to give you a slight overview of the flora, what is happening. You can go by the next slide now. Oh, there were no. Sorry, I was okay. No, you can go ahead one. I was confused by the order, but anyway. Going forward, I think what is important, it's not only the market driving, but we are also supported by a great toolbox by the European Commission and the member states. Robin mentioned already the new emission targets that will be connected to threats of penalties for car companies that will not comply to these emission targets. And we also hear now from local bans of sales for ICE vehicles. I think for the UK, it has been announced for 2030 already. Customers will benefit from tax reliefs when they buy electric vehicles. So we have a lot of things driving the demand. And now you can go to the next slide. This is an overview what happened since 2017, when we started from nothing almost. We have now a set of planned battery factories in Europe. We have stakeholders coming in from China, from Korea, but also from the US establishing factories in Europe. And next one, please. And the same can be seen on the supply side. We have new mines opening. We have factories looking to develop cathode and anode material, which is still one of the weaker sectors, as well as a number of recycling projects and initiatives popping up. So to summarize, finally, can you have the next one? What have we learned so far? We have seen a dramatic increase of market share of advanced lithium-ion battery. It has, in fact, been double exponentially and surprised, I think, everyone. And all the estimates that we received by business intelligence have proven to be not as positive as the market has developed. Next one, or you can take all of them, so I don't need to say it. So the transition to an electrified transport and energy system is happening much faster than anticipated. So there's a lot at stake when it comes to skills and working force, but there are good opportunities for Europe to establish a new industry and do it sustainably from the very start. So we can create a competitive battery industry, and the demand for batteries makes Europe attractive for foreign investment. Thanks to the focus on value chain and cross-sectorial approach, as has been demonstrated by the EBA, it's been fundamental to accelerate the industry in the path that we have seen. The aim is to make Europe a global leader in sustainable battery production and use, and this will be used as a competitive edge, I think, as well to our Asian competitors. And all of this needs a supportive regulatory framework and a political will that we can accelerate even further the market demand. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ilka. That was great. Of course, in Washington, we all know about hockey sticks, thanks to our Swedish stars playing here, Nicholas Backstrom above all. Our next speaker is Stephen Gifford. And let me remind those of you watching to pop your questions into the Slido. We're starting to get some coming in, and we're looking forward to answering those after all the presentations. Stephen is the chief economist at the Faraday Institution, where he's been since 2019. He has about 25 years of experience in policy and economics, including just prior to joining Faraday as the head of economic regulation for the Civil Aviation Authority. And I believe he's joining us from Oxford. Stephen, thank you.
Hello, everybody. Good morning and good afternoon, wherever you are. So I'm going to talk about the UK and also a bit about what the Faraday Institution is doing. So if you flip the first slide, that'll be great. And 2 more clicks as well. I think I've got animation on yours. Another one, that's it. So the Faraday Institution, I'm going to talk about in the Faraday Battery Challenge, which is a research program we've got there. And I'm going to talk about the UK side in terms of policy and developments on gigafactories. So The Faraday Battery Challenge is something that was set up by Theresa May, actually the former Prime Minister, a few years ago, and it is has three parts to it, and these are there's some strategy overall to this. That they're on different parts of the TRL technology readiness level. So Faraday Institution, where I work, is at the research end, focused on the low end of TRLs, and we've got about 78 million focused on fundamental research. So that's working with university at the university levels to accelerate research in battery technologies. And we've got about a dozen programs that I'll talk about in a minute. Then we've got an innovation. So that's collaborative innovation between led by business, but also supported by research. And there's a significant funding for that. And then the third arm, bigger arm of that, is a scale-up facility, which is just before commercialization, just to scale up lab type experiments to commercial scale experiments. Jump onto the next slide, please. So the Faraday Institution, we are the independent institute, as it says there, for electrochemical energy storage. We're very much, I suppose, a virtual institution. Oh, you go back, that's it. Just one click. Yep, got it. And we are focused really on what we call mission-driven research programs. So instead of lots of universities bidding into a central research council and doing one project and then another project, we are kind of overarching mission-driven to help UK move to battery energy storage over the next few decades and towards net zero in 2050. So it's mission driven. We've got to also develop a world-class pool of tech talent. So not just the world's leading electrochemists, but also from PhD level to post graduate level and post PDR level, we call it, postdoctorate and research associate. And then also influencing policy and stakeholders. And our aim is to reduce battery. We've got a number of indicators, so trying to lower cost of batteries, improve the energy density, power density, and performance and reliability, and also to encourage recycling. Next slide, please. You can do 2 more clicks, I think, and I'll do the whole slide. That's it. So this is our portfolio. And since we've been going in, the red ones are our initial phases, initial phase 1 projects, and then the blue ones are the second phase. So our first 5 sort of ones had focused on degradation, so extended battery life, battery modeling, and battery characterization, for example. And then moving up, this arrow here shows about the risk and reward. So the further up you go, the further the technologies is away. So right up towards the end of the scale is solid state batteries, which are perhaps a technology for the 2030s or even the 2040s, and lithium sulfur batteries, which could be a technology for aviation, for example, because they lighter weight batteries. So we've got a number of these projects going. We've also got a recycling one there as well, which I mentioned. Could jump to the next slide, please. As you know, I think it was touched on in the last presentation, China is leading the way in terms of the global market, but battery production is growing fast in Europe. And we can see on this chart the number of gigafactories that are, these are like the Tesla ones in Nevada, for example. You've got growing quite fast from where we are now in 2020. Gigawatt hours is less than 50, but we expect quite significant growth coming over the next 10 years to hit 450. And just some of the gigafactories here are the CATL one in Germany, Poland, and Sweden. So it's growing fast. So the UK, in this sense, is slightly behind the curve in terms of slightly behind the race. But as I come on to next, we're catching up in terms of what we're doing. Overall, Germany is the leading choice, I think, for accounting for about 38% of capacity, and then Poland and Sweden. That's why I got the three examples there. They're also second and third, as I recall. So that's showing fast. They obviously won't catch up with China in terms of the global market, but certainly Europe will be able to serve its own European market pretty soon in the next few years. Next slide, please. And on our side, we've done quite a bit of work on our own side, looking at forecasting and looking at what the demand is in the UK and how it will progress over the next few years. So EV, these are our forecasts on the left-hand side, is how many EV production and overall how many diesel and petrol cars in the grey. I think some of this will have changed from today, which I'll come on to, is an announcement from Prime Minister about his 10-point plan for green energy. And on the right-hand side is how this translates into gigafactories. So we see that the UK would have demand for 7 gigafactories. Obviously, that doesn't mean to say the 7 will be built. They could be supplied from Europe or Asia, for example, batteries. But we think increasingly the battery manufacturing will be sited very close to EV manufacturing, but where the rest of the automotive market is. Batteries are quite difficult to transport long distances, safety reasons or regulation, and it's likely that the regulations are going to get more difficult to try to ship them across boundaries. So we think the co-location is increasingly going to be the important thing, how we see the economics and business of the car automotives industry. And so that will mean that to ensure that there's a UK automotive market, we need to make sure that the UK has a battery manufacturing capacity. But overall, you know, those are the demand, not necessarily the supply. Over the next page, these are our translations to employment on the right. I won't dwell on it. I'll just say that the UK did have the first gigafactory in Europe with the Sunderland plant, which was previously Nissan, but is now owned by other people. But we've also recently have a collaboration between AMT Power and Bridgefort, who are investing 4 billion in a plant, and they signed a memorandum MOU with the Welsh government only last month, and they have plans to produce a 30 gigawatt hour plant. So we're catching up with Europe, and you know, we're positive about what we can offer in terms of the UK has a very good clean energy. It's getting rid of carbon in the grid. It's very competitive business environment, and we've got the 4th largest production of cars in Europe. So we've got lots to offer as well. Final slide, next one. I think we covered, the other lady covered Europe, and the UK side actually has, the developments today is the Prime Minister outlined a 10-point plan for green industrial revolution, which I haven't been able to put on this slide yet because it was just out this morning. But there's large investments in UK charging infrastructure, over £1 billion in that, £500 million towards zero emission vehicles, and most importantly, £500 million towards gigafactories in the UK, securing the gigafactories. And you can see that Europe has already put towards quite a significant amount towards research, and also previously in 2019, Germany put around €1 billion towards electric vehicle gigafactory battery manufacturing, as well as France, similar, about £750 million as well towards it. Now, the detail behind that is a little bit unsure, but certainly there's lots of money going in Europe and in the UK in terms of investing in battery manufacturing and EVs. I'll leave it at there. That's my final slide.
Thanks, Stephen. So the timing was very good from the UK perspective as well, since the Prime
Yeah, so
Minister
today,
made his big announcement. So we'll all have to catch up on that after we get off today's webinar. A final presenter is Danny Kennedy, who's joining us from the Bay Area, and we appreciate his early rising to join us since it's 7:30 a.m. there. Danny's a man with many hats, most notably CEO of New Energy Nexus, which connects clean energy entrepreneurs to potential funders. But another of his hats, and the one that's most relevant for today, is as the president of CalCharge, which is a public-private partnership to advance energy storage in California. Danny, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me, David. It's great to be here with the other panelists and sort of bring the Californian perspective. I think that if we think of California almost like a separate country, it would be the 5th largest economy in the world. And while we're not quite as sophisticated in our strategic thinking as the EU or UK, I do think we have some things to bring to the table on battery strategy, and would love to drive the whole United States economy to play catch up with China and the EU and India and elsewhere. So I'll talk about that in a minute. But just to give you some background on New Energy Nexus, so you understand where our battery and energy storage work sits, I'll just explain some things, but try to fly through these slides, David. We run funds here in California for 15 years, mostly for the California Energy Commission. That's a grant program currently called CalC. Just this year, we've done about 28 new investments, but over the last 3 years, 100. Back in 2006, we were actually very early money into Tesla, which people reference as sort of the touchstone story in this narrative around the battery and the EV transition that we're under. We also run a program with the University of California system, which is the largest public university system in the world. That's sort of an IP-free test bed facility. So we deploy startups with prototypes for verification and measurement, pay for it with the UC system in a way that helps them get down the line or across that valley of death so that their product can be certified to go to market. The next slide, please. We've also been running a program called CalCharge, as David mentioned, which I'm the president of since 2012. It's a public-private partnership with mostly the national labs. This is the key piece of it for the Californian market. We have 3 very famous national labs here: the Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, Lawrence Livermore National Lab, and then SLAC at Stanford, what was the Stanford Linear Accelerator. Those 3, have enormous resources, literally, billions of dollars worth of investment, high performance computing, advanced manufacturing capabilities that are deployed across many sectors. And we're sort of their inside and outside the fence line partner to try to get technologies developed in the energy storage space and collaborate highly with them. We actually curate a conference every year, or have done for the last 6 years, with one of the labs each time, and that's actually happening today and yesterday. So this afternoon, if you want to join, because it's now virtual, we're at Lawrence Livermore with about 400 of California's finest battery scientists and researchers and companies and investors and others. And we run other programs to support startups in the space. The most recent thing we've been focused on the last couple of years is the fact that, and this isn't well known, California actually has probably the world's largest resource of lithium in our borders. Down in the southeast, if you know California's geography, by the Arizona and Mexican border is a county called Imperial County. It's actually the poorest county of California, where there's gross inequality that is found across America, from Silicon Valley, where the wealthy hang, to what we call now Lithium Valley. There's immense poverty and disadvantage, but there's a big geothermal industry there. It's mandated under the Renewable Portfolio Standard of California. As you probably know, the state is on a pretty clear trajectory to 100% renewables by 2045. We're actually in a kind of debate these days about whether we can ratchet that forward, just as Boris Johnson ratcheted forward the EV mandate. We also, as you know, now have an EV mandate in California also, so that's for 2035. So we'll be 100% electric vehicles, 100% electric heavy trucks by 2045, and 100% renewable power in the grid by 2045. And the geothermal industry, which is centered around this thing called the Salton Sea, which is a long-standing historical mistake in California, but a body of water under which there is an aquifer that bubbles up off the San Andreas Fault and has very high concentrations of lithium in the waters that come up for the geothermal. And what we've been pushing is an industry that would extract the lithium out of that water as the steam is taken out for the power production, and then the waters are re-injected down into the aquifer. And so I won't say it's zero environmental footprint, but it's a very low environmental footprint. There are some geothermal brine experiments in Germany and elsewhere in Europe as well, but this one is quite enormous, and the resource is something like 300,000 tons per annum of lithium potential, which would be, you know, close to the current market and certainly a lot of future markets, even as lithium demand grows. So we've been promoting that. We've helped free up tens, $12 million worth of grants to do the chemistry and proof of concept with the California Energy Commission, giving those grants recently to Berkshire Hathaway Energy and another company called Energy Source Materials. And we're really pursuing this opportunity for lithium production in California. For us, it's all about the entrepreneurs. David, if you could just fly forward. You know, we just love to highlight the people that are leading this charge. You know, here's a good case of a separator technology that spun out of Lawrence Berkeley National Lab. Next slide, please. That's Sepion. We've got a great company called CoreShell that just won sort of the national clean energy business competition here in the United States, that has a film that improves safety on the battery separator also. Next slide, please. We run a lot of connection to investors, as David said, to introduce new Energy Nexus. Just last week, we held a series with 6 startups from around the world, and the Mahindra Group in India, which is very interested in electrification there. We should probably have had an Indian person on this panel, actually, because as you probably know, the government's just dropped $10 billion to also enter the race with their startup cluster, or startup hub it's called, and their industrial strategy to try to ensure their independence from Chinese supply. And then lastly, if you could go to the next slide, we run a lot of corporate innovation programs at New Energy Nexus. David, if you can progress one more. We've been for a couple of years working with LG Chem here in California, and at Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, we work with them on an innovation program under a CRADA. But we've also managed this battery challenge with them, and now Hyundai and Kia have joined it. So we sort of are in partnership with some of the Korean giants. And while we talk a lot about China dominating the supply chain of batteries to date, it's a true statement in terms of where they're physically located. But of course, of the big 6, you know, CATL is Chinese, SK, Samsung, LG Chem are Korean, and then, you know, you probably would go down to the Teslas and a couple other players. So we're working with these guys. Just fast forward through these slides about the EV and battery challenge, just to show you that there's lots of startups. This last slide is where I wanted to end. Sorry, go back one. This was actually from our friends at the Rocky Mountain Institute, which is a partner with us on a number of programs. But basically, you know, the US doesn't have a battery alliance. It doesn't have what the Europeans have been doing since 2017, so well described by Ilka. We don't have a coordinated thesis about this sector. And while we have some really great assets in the system, particularly around the national lab system of the Department of Energy, from Argonne to Oak Ridge to the 3 that I mentioned here in California, and Sandia and Pinel and others around the country, all involved in energy storage research, they're not in a coordinated sense deploying and scaling, and certainly not focused on the manufacturing and the supply chain pieces and the workforce development. There's a big gap in the middle of this graph about what would be needed to have a true technology support ecosystem. Here in California, we're trying to kludge together the pieces, but you know, I run a little nonprofit, and CalCharge is a 2-staff person public-private partnership. It's not something that has the backing from the top that we need. And I'll just conclude to tell a slightly apocryphal story, which is that we, along with our sort of counterpart on the East Coast, New York BEST, the Battery Energy Storage Technology Center, which is a wonderful organization doing similar work to us in that the Empire State, the big fish on the other coast. We and New York BEST and another number of organizations proposed to the Department of Commerce in 2016 to do something very similar to the European Battery Alliance. It was called Supercharge, or the Supercharge Institute, a national network manufacturing initiative, which is a particular model of industrial strategy that the US has done well in pharma and other sectors that I'm sure David Hart would be able to describe. We were actually found to have merit as a concept for funding by the Department of Commerce. We were awarded a $70 million grant to get it going, and would have rolled out something akin to the battery alliance that the Europeans did in 2017, also in 2017. So we would have been off to the races then. That unfortunately did not get funded ultimately in the Trump administration. And so here we are in 2021 now, 5 years behind, with this hole in the middle of the country and missing the shot, even though all the demand generation, all the drivers that you were talking about in the UK, Stephen, all that exists in the US. You know, California is going to go EV. It's the 5th largest economy in the world. It's going to pull the rest of the US with it. That's going to happen. We could be buying our batteries from across the Pacific. That's the most likely scenario. There's even a strange scenario where we're producing the lithium for our batteries in California, shipping it out of Long Beach to China and buying it back from them as a value-added product at this stage. I think that's quite a likely scenario, unless we get our act together and do something akin to the European Battery Alliance. And obviously that'd be a shame for our defense and security interests. It would be a shame for the environmental footprint and our jobs opportunities and all the rest of it. Just on the last point I'll make is just on the climate impact alone. We think that if we use geothermal brines to source the lithium rather than buy spodumene sourced lithium from Australia going through China for refining and processing, and then across the Pacific to electrify the transport fleets of America, we would have a 10% impact in terms of carbon into the atmosphere over the decades that it will take to actually electrify transport here. So, you know, it's 10x improvement if we use local homegrown geothermal source brine rather than the options on the spot market. With that, I'll hand it back to you, David. Thank you.
Thanks, Danny. That was great. And I would love to spend the rest of the time talking about the U.S. and what it needs to do. I've put some opinions out there in my blog, which Rob Boyle mentioned earlier, but I think that requires a whole other session, and we're looking forward to seeing what the president-elect and the new administration bring forward. But let me pick up one of the questions, and let me again invite the audience to submit some questions. Keying off of Danny's last comment, this is a question for Ilka. The question is, what's the evidence that the European Battery Alliance has been effective? And if I can be a little bit parochial, you know, what lessons would you share with the U.S. if the U.S. were to follow the path that Danny described and try to do something similar?
I think the evidence is that currently we are the most attractive. That was a terrible echo. Try again. I think the maps that I showed you on the ongoing and thriving battery industry in Europe is proof enough. There have been within a couple of years from no activity, we have now first establishment of a truly European gigafactory, the one that you mentioned in Skellefteå in northern Sweden, where we actually saw those strategic alliances between people coming from Tesla with a bold vision to establish this industry in Europe, taking those conversations in our meetings with potential off-takers and kind of having the seed of this European battery industry developing inside Europe. And I see the new mines that are initiatives that are coming up. I think a couple of years ago, none of this was happening. And as Danny described, there's also activities in extracting lithium from the brines going on. So I think this parallel development between the market supported by this regulatory framework that is driving the market. I mean, this is the European Commission really means it seriously with a Green Deal. And all the communications that have been published, it is really pushing for zero emission. And there's a new document that leaked out that is talking about that they will need to emit 0 grams of CO2 from 2026, I think, all cars sold in Europe. I mean, this is driving the electrification. And I think this is like this parallel development of a market together with policymakers that has been the success factor of the EBA.
Yeah, one thing that really struck me, and maybe I'll invite others to comment on this, is the willingness of the Commission to act ahead of demand. As you mentioned, Ilka, the demand was relatively slow, and there was a projection that would grow. But one of the challenges in this particular area, as in the case of solar as well, is the need for very large investments ahead of demand. And certainly in the US, there's been some reluctance to get out ahead of what they think consumers will do. Maybe let me ask Stephen, how do you see the dance between demand and supply in the UK? You're on mute still, Stephen.
Yes, so I think demand and supply, that's very important not to get ahead of demand. What we see is the electric vehicles have had quite a good year, barring the coronavirus crisis. So they've more than tripled, I think, as a number of sales. So it hasn't damaged the path to electrification. But as you know, today there was an announcement to end petrol and diesel new car sales by 2030, which is quite a difficult thing for automotive companies to do, because they lead on either a 5 or 7 year supply chain. So what they're doing now in terms of research and new models will come through in 7 years. So a 10-year transition is quite a challenge, and it's very difficult. So you could say it's not getting ahead of demand or supply, it's actually forcing supply and forcing demand for a quicker transition than the market would otherwise take place.
Yeah, for sure. And the one thing we saw in the US in the case of solar power was tremendous demand, but no supply ultimately emerged. And essentially, and maybe Danny can speak to this, you mentioned a scenario where the US would essentially import most of its EV batteries. And one can imagine the US following the pathway of the solar industry. And it's going to take a little bit of courage to avoid that outcome, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's the current story. We all know about the famous factory up the hill here in Nevada that Tesla maintains, but it's basically bringing in cells from Asia. And that's our future unless we change tack and get, courageous, as the UK and Europe has clearly done, to direct demand and supply. I mean, my only hope is that we've reminded ourselves this year with COVID that governments do this. The United States is famous for this. This is why we coined the name Lithium Valley. Silicon Valley wasn't a mistake. It didn't just grow up in an orange orchard near Stanford University. It was decades of strategic flooding of the field with money from the Department of Defense to beat the Russians at microchips. We chose to do that, to build that industry and to dominate it and grow everything downstream of that, which includes all the brands we now know, like Apple and Google and Facebook and whatever, that we're grappling with the market power of. But, we're naive to pretend this won't happen without government dynamism and action. And the United States is at peril of losing the biggest single industrial job opportunity and value creation opportunity of the 21st century through this process.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm really glad you made the point about Silicon Valley. There's a lot of mythology about Silicon Valley as if it sprang from, Steve Jobs' garage, or Hewlett and Packard's garage. But in fact, the government did play a big role, and some of the biggest players in the industry have almost forgotten that. In energy, of course, it's much harder to get away from a government role. Let me turn to another question, a group of questions that came in from the audience having to do with the supply chain and particularly raw materials. So there's one, is Europe really willing to have increased mining? Another is asking about emerging markets. And another, where does the UK plan to get raw materials? So let me just toss this first to Ilka, then to Stephen. And Danny's spoken a little bit about lithium in California, but if he wants to chime in at the end, let me open that. But Ilka, is Europe really willing to start mining? And how much do you worry about that raw material question? You're muted, Ilka.
Mute, yeah.
There we go.
Let's unmute
Yeah.
ourselves. I think if I wanted to start at the worrying part first. I think Europe really needs to worry. There have been predictions on looking at the supply side, where at the moment the growth for electrification is actually battery constrained or cell constrained. And there are predictions that from 2030 on, it will be raw material constrained. Looking if the growth that is continued as it does right now, we have made our own calculation, and it shows that it will actually be raw material constraint by 2025 already for the industry with the actual growth in demand. So there is a need to have materials to produce batteries, and this can be done partly by recycling. I think this will be an important part, but nevertheless we will need fresh input of virgin materials as well. And this, of course, is a topic for Europe, because whether you like it or not, all mining activities will create an impact on the environment where you do have the mines. I think Europe is going in a threefold direction, you could say. There are initiatives to support new mining activities in Europe, and it can be either opening of new mines, and the brine project in Germany, which is really, I think, favorable, because it's not an open pit or underground mining. It's rather even connected to geothermal energy, would be very good. But of course, there are other minerals that you also could extract from current wastes. I think manganese is one of those materials that actually is present already. Also another set to increase resource efficiencies, but we need to have a greater understanding that the green transition will demand more materials. It's not only for batteries, it's for all. It's for wind energy, it's for PVs. We will use metals and minerals in the green transition, and either we source them from Europe or outside Europe. I think we have to be firm on that. We try to produce them as sustainable and ethical as possible to get this acceptance. I think there we can make no compromise, and I hope that in the future battery regulations there will be put in clear mandatory demands on the sourcing and traceability of the material, whether it comes from Europe or outside Europe, to really improve the situations also for the mining industry outside Europe.
Stephen, how is the UK thinking about the raw material question?
I don't think it's thinking enough. So we've been doing a lot of thinking. I've been doing a lot of work on this as well. And so I fed into the consultation, well, not the consultation, I fed into the government policy on this issue in particular. So lithium, the demand for lithium because of electric vehicles will need to increase by 5-fold globally, is my back of the envelope calculation. So that's quite a challenging step. So I think to break out the issue in a number of things, we think there's plenty of lithium in the world. The question is mining it and the lead times to get those mines operational, and then the supply chain. So to mine that amount of lithium, you need new mines. You need to develop, you need to invest and expand existing mines. And typically, you're talking about a decade from thinking about doing a mine to actually coming operation. So that's going to mean towards the late 2020s, bottlenecks in supply as demand for EVs outstrips what was anticipated supply. So you're going to get price spikes, all those sorts of things. But I think it's really a question, the problem with raw materials is a question of supply and the supply chain. So getting all of that into new markets, new countries which don't have any indigenous raw materials. I mean, we've got a few opportunities in the UK, so Cornwall Lithium, Cornish lithium mining. So they're looking at, and they've got some deposits. Whether it'll be more than 20% of our supply is probably, it's not going to get more than 20% supply on a good outcome. So it's very much an issue, very much thinking about it, but in terms of how you get the supply chain, an efficient supply chain from the rest of the world to the UK.
Thanks, Danny. I can see you want to weigh in, but let me also ask you to touch on the recycling question since they're interconnected.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think the mental model we use in this conversation is a bit flawed. We're not talking about a fuel. We're talking about a stock, not a flow, because it's not like fossil fuels. The 21st century energy supply is going to be, as the IEA said a couple of weeks ago, dominated by solar, which is silicon, a material that can be entirely recycled. So if you assume that 25-year life power plants, the solar arrays, they're actually probably more like 50, you then recycle them. And you can do that fully and should do. And the European Union's actually been mandating that for years. And it's largely true. It's captured. So same with batteries. You know, this is why the European Union position is quite enlightened, the circular economy piece of this. This lithium we bring up once, and Stephen, I think you have to sharpen your pencil. It's a lot more than 5x. It's going to grow substantially. I mean, Bloomberg reckon 10, I reckon 50. But as soon as you get the lithium out of the ground, you then cycle it through the system. We've got startups here in the States that are doing 95% upcycling of the product from the batteries in your laptops and your cell phones, meaning it's better the next generation as a feedstock into the system. So we have a circular economy proposition here where we do a couple decades of mining, virgin material production, but then we reuse it for centuries. And it actually works really well at very low cost, producing the thing we actually need, which is electricity, without a once-through fuel system that we, burn and then aspirate carbon into the atmosphere to kill ourselves. That's the difference. And the numbers are something like 2 or 3% of the material and metals that the fossil fuel economy has required over the last century of industrialization. So, it's a chalk and cheese conversation, and I think we have to catch up with where we're going in the economic terms.
Thanks. Well, I haven't heard chalk and cheese in quite a while, so I appreciate the reference. So we've just got a couple of minutes left. I think I'll just go around the panel as I see it and ask for any closing thoughts or recommendations, and then we'll wrap up. Rob Boyle, do you have any closing remarks you'd like to share?
No, I think it's interesting the point that Danny makes about the circular economy aspect of it and the potential for it, because one of the big challenges we've got in Europe, and I'm sure will be a debate in other countries, is this suggestion that transition to a climate neutral economy is somehow going to devastate employment opportunities in a lot of old sectors. And I would argue that when you look at circular economy, you've got a lot of labor intensive tasks, and you've got a lot of tasks at different skill levels. So this can also be an opportunity to actually start to look at alternative employment for people who maybe aren't coal mining anymore, but might be lithium mining, and people who aren't doing some of the old manufacturing jobs, but might end up doing some of this upcycling. So there's a benefit there. Also, I might throw out.
Thanks, Rob. I think we should move on to Ilka. Yeah, we're just running up against our time. Yeah, excuse me, Ilka. Go ahead if you have any closing thought.
Yeah, no, I'm really pleased that we finish up this panel on this positive note and talking about sustainability and recycling when it comes to this new industry. And I think we are actually at the verge of having this opportunity that we build this new industry on the premises of sustainability and really make sure that this will be valid for the entire value chain. And I hope that this will happen everywhere in EU, in the UK, that so sadly left us or will leave us, as well as in the US. And then we just hope that the Asian companies will follow.
Thanks, Stephen.
So one of our research projects on recycling. I think the challenge with recycling is the commercial reality of it, because battery costs are falling down, therefore the material costs remaining in the battery are falling as well. So you're going to have to get more and more efficient doing it. So that's what one of our projects is automating, looking at the robotics of how you do that, taking out the labor, which should help drive down cost of recycling. That's all. Yeah, but it's one of the things that we've been working on, is trying to get a recycling industry developed in the UK. We've got quite a few years, because 2030 recycling is 2020 sales, basically.
Yeah, good point about time lags, which is one of the challenging things here. Danny, last word.
I'll just say all that I would not expect to get the Asian companies to follow. Just FYI, I think they'll lead, Ilka. And you know, I think thank you to you and Stephen and Rob for showing us what the Europeans and the UK are doing, because America needs to get its act together and do something similar. David, I trust you'll lead us in that direction from Washington, DC. Supercharge it.
Yeah, I don't know whether Washington can lead, but it can certainly follow more effectively than it has. We really look to California to lead. So let me thank the presenters. Fantastic presentations. I really appreciate your keeping to the time. The substantive content was great. And I hope we'll revisit this subject again. We can bring in some other countries. We haven't talked about a number of other places in addition to India that are active in this space. So it's a complex, dynamic, and rapidly growing, and as people have mentioned, tremendous opportunities coming down the road. And with that, we'll adjourn and wish you a good evening in Stockholm, good afternoon in London, good evening in Brussels, good morning in California, and good day to everywhere else in the world where you might be watching. Thank you again for joining us.